Hey everyone, I'm Jay Bell from Panda Game Manufacturing, and today you're going to get a metaphorical bird's eye view at a game that soars high in both the hobby and mass market sections of our industry. It's a beautiful game that keeps on growing and evolving, so nestle into a comfy space and join me as we go behind the board. Jamey Stegmaier, the man behind Stonemaier Games. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm happy to be here. Yeah, I love talking about this kind of stuff. And it's great to meet you, Jay.
Wingspan came out in 2019, and less than 5 years later, it has had its 25th printing. What it was like to realize this product would be an evergreen product and more than something that would just get, a couple printings and be popular in just a few groups.
I mean, it's always a surprise and a delight when that happens. Maybe not necessarily a surprise, actually. I say surprise, but we're always hoping that happens. We're always planning for a game to become evergreen because, we spend a lot of time and energy and love in every single game that we make. Wingspan was one of the games that I was actually a little worried about because I didn't know if hobby gamers would accept this bird theme. Despite how much we love the mechanisms, we weren't sure if they would accept the theme. And fortunately, they embraced it out of the gate.
Talking about kind of that balance of hobby gamers, and then you also have another market in mass market gamers who love the bird theme. Tell me about when Wingspan sort of garnered that audience outside of our normal hobby.
Yeah, fairly early on in Wingspan's existence, we had the great fortune of getting some press from some outlets that don't typically cover games, like the New York Times. And that immediately started a chain of events where a lot of people who are outside of the modern game hobby started hearing about the game. And like you said, they were drawn to the theme. Birders were drawn to the theme. Casual gamers were drawn to the theme, this nature theme that we see really taking off, I think, in the gaming world now. And that led to us selling a lot of copies of Wingspan early on, but it also led to us getting Wingspan in places like Target that Stonemaier Games didn't previously have access to. We didn't have a Target account, but Wingspan made Target pay attention to us a little bit. So yeah, it was a couple years before it really took that mass market route, but we were starting to get the attention of people in the mass market world before Wingspan appeared on Target shelves.
Yeah. So on that note, I also realized that Wingspan was a project that you did not run a Kickstarter for. What was it like to try and navigate that change, but then also, pivot when the demand for Wingspan became huge?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things about crowdfunding back in the day when I used to run crowdfunding campaigns was the ability to better gauge demand, or at least early adoption demand, first printing demand. And Wingspan, we didn't have that. We had confidence in this game. We wanted to just go ahead and make the game and then sell it when we had it in our fulfillment centers, sell it to consumers and sell it to retailers and distributors. And so what we did instead to gauge demand is that we talked to some distributors and we said, hey, we have this amazing game based on birds. How many copies do you think we should make in the first printing? And the answer we kept getting time after time was hesitantly, cautionarily, 10,000 copies. And so we made 10,000 copies. As it turns out, that was way too few copies for what we needed for Wingspan, partially based on the early positive reviews. When we started sending out advanced review copies, the reviews came back very, very strong and very, very positive out of the gate. And that's when I reached out to my project manager at Panda, Shannon, and I said, I think we need some more copies of this. Can we do another print run? And we actually started 2 other print runs while that first print run was being shipped to the first batch of customers, the first printing customers.
Along with not doing a Kickstart comes the idea that you don't really get input from backers and consumers the way that you normally would. I know you mentioned you talked to distributors about quantities and demand, but did this project change sort of how you develop games at all?
That's a good question, because we do get a lot of feedback from playtesters. We have a pretty vast blind playtest system where we're sending digital copies of our games around the world for people to print and play at home. And we won't even publish a game if we're not getting great feedback from those playtesters. So that gives us confidence in any game, but we still don't know how the broader market will receive the game. What one key thing that we did learn on a Wingspan that isn't necessarily related to those people in particular, because we have a proofreading team, but they're you'll understand more in a second what I'm getting at. But in the first print run of Wingspan, we made a late edit, just a tiny little edit to some of the text, and in a kind of replace all mistake, the word between, which usually has 2 E's back to back, ended up having 3 E's, between. And we didn't catch it because it was a very late change. It was after the proofreaders usually see the game. And so the first printing was printed with this word, which appears around 20 times in the game with an extra E in it. And so that was kind of a reminder to us that whenever we make any change, we need to have a second layer, a backup layer of someone looking at it. And really, that also made me very cautious to make any late changes like that at all, because you never know when a human error will be reproduced or will be created that you're not even looking for. You know, if I ask my graphic designer to make a specific change, I can look to see if she made that change correctly. But it's really hard for me to look at then all the other files to see if something was made incorrectly by mistake.
That is a very interesting point. I don't know that I've ever played a first edition. I mean, I remember playing Wingspan back in 2019 when I first got involved with the hobby, but I wasn't reading the rule book. Someone was teaching it to me.
And that does remind me with that, soon after we realized that non-gamers were playing Wingspan, we did add the Swift Start pack, which is kind of a play as you go, learn as you play tutorial for Wingspan that we added to hopefully help the non-gamers onboard themselves into the game. So that was something else that we realized after the game started to take off a bit.
What also sort of prompted the idea that Wingspan would be this game with wooden dice and a dice tower? And for the first time in my gaming history, I saw like linen finish on the cards, the rule books, and everything. It was quite a phenomenon for me.
I'm glad you had that response to open up the box and seeing what the components look like, because we aim for that in every game. We want every game to feel special, and we work very closely with Panda for even little things like textures, the linen in the rulebook and the linen in the cards. It adds I don't know, that tactile sense, I think, adds something to the experience. The dice tower was designer Elizabeth Hargrave's idea. She thought it would give a sense of elevation to the game on the table for a game that is mostly flat, flat mats, flat cards. And Panda usually doesn't let us make wooden dice because it's hard to get them, perfectly calibrated when you're working with wood. But for a game like this, where everyone is picking from the same dice from the dice tower rather than rolling your own dice, Panda was okay with us doing that. So it was that wooden dice felt right for the game, giving the natural feel and theme of the game.
So glad you brought those up, because even now in my account management, 4 years later, since the game has come out, I mention to players all the time when they ask, what's the best way for me to maximize an experience but still make it affordable? And they have, 16, 25, 30 dice in their game. So I asked them, okay, how are players using these? Are they communal? Have you played Wingspan? Have you considered wooden dice? And sometimes it does work out where players can take advantage of that alternate material and still have the experience not affected by the imperfect balance of the game. So I think that's just another area where you've sort of set a standard that can be touched upon and learned from.
That's really cool. That's really cool to hear. Yeah, and you're right. It's a great question to ask. Like, this is a highly competitive game where you need every die to be perfectly balanced, or does that not have as big of an impact?
So Wingspan does so many different unique things and continues to kind of grow and evolve, especially with the components, right? There are the eggs in the game, the tokens that start as punch board, but you can get the acrylic tokens as well. Do you feel like the opportunities are sort of endless? Is there a 5 to 10 year plan for all of the unique and cool things that Wingspan can do, or is it sort of a response to the industry's trends and growing just tendencies?
It's a good question. So part of my answer is a little bit about the past, which is that one of the ways that Wingspan has evolved over the last few years is the change from using plastic components to using tree and paper-based components. Some of the feedback we got about Wingspan, the first 20 printings of Wingspan or so, was that there's a lot of plastic in a game that's based on nature and wants to do the right thing for nature. There were plastic there's a plastic kind of tray for the cars. There's plastic trays for the resources. There are a lot of plastic bags. And so I worked with Shannon, and Shannon worked with Panda and other people for a long time to try to find alternate solutions to those things. And so now if you buy a copy of Wingspan, you have a sugarcane pulp card tray that is like vastly more expensive than the plastic version of it, even though it looks cheaper, which is something else to deal with customer perceptions. We have replacements for the plastic containers as well, and we've tried to get rid of as many bags as possible. And the eggs, importantly, you mentioned the eggs changed from being plastic to wood, even though many people thought originally that the eggs were wood because they have a special texture to them. So that's one thing that Wingspan has been really inspiring for us, to look at those types of components and look at other ways that we can make them. I guess this is a past decision that hopefully will have a positive impact on the future of Wingspan and other games as well. So the other part about the future is the future plan for the greater world of Wingspan. And part of that plan is to continue to expand Wingspan itself with one expansion per continent. We still have Antarctica, Africa, and Central and South America. So that's part of the plan. That's a big part of the plan. There's also probably some promo packs that will release over time, maybe an extinct bird promo pack, maybe some promo packs of highly requested birds for continents that we've already covered. And then we're also looking to spin off some of the core mechanisms of Wingspan that people are familiar with, that have really resonated with people, into other worlds that aren't about birds. Those announcements will come in 2024 and probably 2025.
Absolutely. The way you talk about the game, it just resonates with this knowledge and this planning of like what it's like to build sort of a franchise around a game. And I think that's so important for publishers, indie and established, to think about when just creating their products, right? You talk about how Wingspan has the potential to do more expansions for birds all across different continents. And, as we become more eco-friendly and it fits the theme, it makes sense for you to discover new ways to manufacture components with eco-friendly materials. And I think those are things that we strive to bring out in these sort of behind the board series, where consumers can think about ways to make their plastic eggs feel like wood, or actually change them to wood, and make the theme make sense for the components, and the components make sense for the theme.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, because it isn't a case where we're suddenly converting all plastic components into wooden components, because sometimes, or the other way around. We released Expeditions this past year that has metal mechs, that has a big plastic insert, because we thought that was best for the experience for the game. So we're always balancing what the theme, the mechanisms, the experience we're trying to provide with components that are hopefully as sustainable as possible, while still meeting that experience, because we're trying to bring joy to tabletops. And sometimes if you open up a game and if you have 20 different bags of components, that's not a good experience either. So a nice insert can really help in those cases.
Now, you did slightly mention your project manager, Shannon, and it makes me want to know a little bit more about what the Stonemaier team makeup is as far as manufacturing. It just handled so many projects at once. Shannon's an extension of your team, and so is your pre-press specialist. But what is it like to do so much?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Shannon, because Shannon has been incredible to work with over the years. I started out working with Chris, who I think is no longer with Panda, by his own choice. Yeah, I think he had a great time, good experience with Panda. I enjoyed working with him. I really enjoy working with Shannon now as well. And Shannon, like you said, is an extension of the Stonemaier Games team. When we do team lunches every couple months, we hop on Zoom. We just do it because we're spread out all over the country. We do team lunches. I invited Shannon to join us for these because he feels like he's part of the team. All of us are corresponding with him just as much as we do each other internally at Stonemaier Games. And Shannon has really helped shape so many key decisions based on his knowledge of the process and the components and the price and shipping and all these different elements of product and project management.
I know you've talked about some of the key decisions that Shannon has been able to give that manufacturing input on. One of the things that I'm sure was a dialogue and, a constant trial and error until you were able to figure out the best solution was changing things to, FSC materials and discovering the right solution for the pulp trays. What has it sort of been like to dive into the unknown and come up with these better ways to make games?
Yeah, diving into the unknown and trying to create create something new is one thing. That's an important thing that I always work with Shannon with, but also trying to take something that we already make, like Wingspan, and try to make it better, or better for the environment, is an ongoing puzzle. And one thing that I really had to learn is patience, because that sort of change doesn't happen overnight. Um, we were getting a lot of calls from people at the time to saying like, you need to change these things right away. This has to happen immediately. And I respect the urgency behind those calls, but as Shannon helped me learn, and he pointed out over time that a quick change isn't always the most sustainable change, and it isn't always the right change for production. I'm trying to think of an example here of something that he may have mentioned in terms of like the FSC compliance. Basically, the idea that you want to do something right so that you can continue to do it that way for a long time, not just do a quick fix that looks good on paper temporarily. And I really appreciate Shannon and Panda's diligence in finding those long-term solutions, not just a short-term fix.
So with all of the knowledge and experience you have with manufacturing, Jamey, though you do this on your blog, every week, once a month, talk about manufacturing and give advice, what's maybe one or two things you would try to instill in indie designers, indie publishers, or even some of our established publishers to kind of think about when they're thinking about manufacturing?
When I'm starting to work on a game, I'll request an early estimate of what that game might look like, knowing that those components might change significantly over time. But having a foundation for what we can do, what we can make, and what price it might be, or what cost it might be early on, can really have a great impact. That knowledge can have a great impact on how the game is developed over time. And so I really appreciate Shannon being willing to send those early estimates, knowing, and he knows every time that the components, the component counts, a lot of stuff is going to change over time on those early estimates. But that's something that I advocate to anyone who has a partner like Shannon, or Panda, willing to work with them from the beginning on those early estimates. That's definitely the number one thing. Maybe the secondary thing is that I have found with Shannon that he has kind of opened his door for me to ask about component samples at any time, and it's led to a lot of creativity. It's led to a lot of components not being used, but it's also led to a lot of components that we wouldn't have otherwise have thought of or considered. Like you mentioned earlier, the rulebook texture in Wingspan. It's a texture that we started using back on Between Two Castles. And it was just, I think at one point, I think Shannon said to me, he was like, Jamey, there are other textures that we could use for the rulebooks other than the standard, like, kind of lack of texture. And he sent me this big book of textures. And I got to go through, I kind of went through it with my eyes closed and found the textures that I like the most. And I said, Shannon, can we make this? Because how expensive is this, like, luxurious texture? And it wasn't that much more expensive. And so we've been using that for our rulebooks ever since. So I love just having that sort of open door with Shannon and Panda to explore and discover new components and new ways of creating components that I thought were set in stone.
I'm really happy that you mentioned that, because it makes me think about the fact that we don't just say, at Panda, we're also gamers. It's true. We love to see luxurious, really cool games being made, and we want to be a part of that. So whenever we're working with our clients, we want to give them the best options, the options that, we know exist and think would work for the game. And I think it's something that folks should keep in mind, whether they're working with us or any manufacturer. Just don't be afraid to ask, because we're in a renaissance of gaming where things are only getting cooler and opportunities are just even more and more vast. And I can't wait to see what next thing happens with Wingspan. That's really cool.
Me too. Yeah, I'm excited about the future as well. And you're right. I love Panda's willingness to be open to those questions. Is this possible? And oftentimes the answer is yes. It might be too expensive. It might not work out. It might be hard to do at scale. But oftentimes the answer is yes. I'm amazed at what Panda is able to create.
Well, Jamey, thank you so much for taking this flight with us and going behind the board with Wingspan.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, I love talking about the stories behind our games, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so.